of this table. So, good morning. I'm very pleased to be part of this Congress that again shows how we have international tax law a huge issue because currently we have more than 500 enrolls in this congress. So I would like to thank the honor of being part of this congress, and especially Professor Silvestre from ABITT, Maito Shueri. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. With this, today we're going to talk about a macro subject, which is transfer pricing, challenges in the initial adoption of the OECD standards. As I said, questions are more important than the answers. And also, Stephen Kenneth said the biggest mistake one can do is trying to find right solutions for wrong problems. Therefore, the new legislation on transfer pricing, in fact, has as its intention to allow Brazil to comply with international commitments in a more efficient way. But we will hear today the experience of each one of our panelists to try to identify the main challenges that we will have to face and solve to know if, as some say, we were happy and were not aware, or that we truly could improve this legal system to comply with this target. Therefore, I pass the floor to our panelist, Dr. Audrey, who I congratulate, and the further panelists here present. And I'm sure that, like me, we will all learn a lot during this debate that will start now. So, Dr. Audrey, take the floor. Thank you, Mara. All the participants, thank you. The panelists on this table, Flávio, Vivian, Natalia, and André, for accepting to participate in this panel, and I'm very honored to be the moderator. Thank you, Professor Chueiro, Maito, Luiz Flávio, for the invitation. And before starting, I would like to share with you something that we will evolve, and by doing so in our lives and career, what's important for us will change. And I believe one of the most important things I see today in my career and life, it's being generous, giving. So thank you, Professor Flavio, for being one of the most generous person I know. And this implies in several layers. It's not only give visibility to the next of person, but being sure, secure enough to give visibility to others to shine. And I would like to thank here Professor Victor Polizelli, which are the most generous academics and professionals I know. Thank you very much. And then to start in our table, we have thought about something different for you, which I believe this subject allows this. It's a wide subject. What are the challenges and difficulties for the adoption? And we brought those in this table. They are experts in their own point of view. So we thought, what's the best way to share this with our audience? And we thought it would be more through a debate because we share experiences in a light and deep way, take into account the specific experience of each panelist. So I say our table will be polemic. It's not going to be ordinary, but I think this is the role of the debate. That's why we are here today. So I would like to start my first question to Professor André, who participated of study groups within the RAF and also the Federal Revenue Service, and he PhD thesis addressing transfer pricing before the adoption, there are some difficulties and challenges we could face. So I would like you to share with us, Professor André, your experience and history that you have experienced. So, good morning. First, I would like to thank the invitation and to come one more time back to this fantastic theater. Thank you, IBDT, and especially for the dear Chairman Dr. Ricardo Maris and the peers there. There are so many. I will summarize just into the person of Dr. Ricardo at USP, Professor Luiz Eduardo Schwery, and these attendees that are so generous with me throughout many congresses. So I would like to share my story with you so you understand my point of view. For 31 years, next 32, tax auditor for the Brazilian Federal Revenue Service. I did masters in Leiden, PhD in Salamanca. I went abroad to deepen my knowledge and more complications, books. And all things have the academic side of things, which is in theory, but I already drawn up in fraction experts report with transfer pricing, and I migrated recently for judgment on DRO4 Recife session. I was the reporter of two huge process of transfer pricing, one 580 million and the other 250 million, both processes. So I know transfer pricing, hands-on operation, auditing, judging also, and I know very well the theory of it, and I attended several groups. Since I ended my PhD in '06, I attended several working groups on the inside the central body, COSIP, Corina, that deals with international taxation, especially transfer pricing. And we had, in fact, an expectation of three possible views. Either we specifically would improve our initial framework of 9430, and there were some views to gauge margins by specific sectors of the economy, and we could try to improve that assumption of margins falling within a more realistic view. In my opinion, this was feasible. I always advocated this idea, but also advocated a hybrid model because we could take some points of OECD model or optional methods and put into the Brazilian legislation. So not that much, not that little. Our previous model, going backwards, it provided some easiness because it was forecastable, guaranteeing the safety. So it was interesting and less complex than the OCD model. And throughout all this time, we could consider that there was a volume that was not that high of dispute, either being administrative or judicial. And then see, when we also, the Brazilian method was advised by the tax committee of UN for developing countries and so forth, and many international authors, they deemed the old method that would be interesting for such countries, developing countries. So we were used to hear that it's important for Brazil to adhere to the methodology of OECD. It's interesting for the insertion of Brazil in the international economy in a more harmonized way, and it goes. Now, as for global production chain, but one can notice that for 50 years Brazil is within the 50 biggest economies worldwide. It did not adopt this model. And when we talk about value generation, the production chain, we keep on being a country that exports commodity. This is an important point. When we are at the tip of this chain with high technology products, electronic items, vehicles, so forth. We have a different dimension. But we are not at the point of this chain. We're at the beginning. We supply inputs, raw material, and agribusiness. Therefore, economically wise, this is not justified. This would not be the argument. Now, when we absorb the methodology OECD 14, 4, 5, 6, and the normative ruling, Brazil invokes to itself all the former problems and criticisms that it has the arm's length principle in the international community for many years. We exit the practicability model of a certain um, legality, legal system through the law, and what the margin we have to apply, and then we go to the subjectivity of things. So we notice that the ordinary criticism, its absence of comparable regarding double taxation risk also included. So there's a considerable rate of the subjectivity, functional risk analysis, and within this balance, we can see difficulties that the world face, and we brought to Brazil's reality. It's what we're going to start now to learn. I was talking last week with Fiat Chrysler executive in Pernambuco, northbound of Brazil, and I placed this argument. Do you have already this expertise? André, stop there. Who has this expertise? Are the companies from this group abroad? Here we are pari passu with you. We will start to use, start to learn. We have challenges that are extremely heavy to face. And what's the biggest problem I see with arm's length? If companies create their domestic market to evade the inefficiencies of the free open market, whereupon they effectively will work with integrated economy, which will generate scale economy, productivity gains, payback rates gr- on growing. It's normal that the company to be more efficient. An arm's length principle cannot reach effectively this positive differential. It tells to compare what is the most efficient price with the free market price, which is the less efficient price. Therefore, this is an aspect that's interesting for us not to lose sight. Now, when one look BEPS project and its 15 sub-actions specifically, all, no exception, they talk with transfer pricing. And interesting to notice with this is that within this context, if we have 70 to 80% on transactions that are done in international environment, they happen within the transfer pricing logic. All these arrangements of we saw of the 15 sub actions, they are intrinsically linked to transfer pricing, i.e., the core of BEPS project is transfer pricing. But BEPS project did not tackle the essence, the core, did not want to go deep, face, and address inefficiencies of arm's length. Action 50, MNI, it's the raw material of the tax administration. None of them work without a database and base of information that is necessary and sturdy in order to truly be able to establish what would be that price. And then see the following. Brazil's scenario, we had of the 15 sub-actions, several that dealt with the transfer pricing for capitalization, interest on own capital, but finally we have corporate foreign company tax transparency and other countries also. What the PEPS model did was try to fine tune with new view and refresh these relevant subjects, but the core would always be the transfer pricing. And then see the following. Within this landscape where we kept our tax collection base, which was the biggest detail of Brazil's rule, we will now start for a new model and it's different. But to wrap up this first talk, I think we got used to do things mechanic-based erosion profit shifting it of BEPS. And who does profit transfer? The agony of developed countries when they were invited for G20 meeting in 2012 on Mexico, OECD to coordinate a huge project. It was the evasion of tax base. And what caused the erosion? This transfer of profits like an instrument that does transfer pricing. And the main instrument of tax control of transfer pricing was not faced because it's the arm's length. OECD was not bold and dared to address arm's length and kept as the standard criteria for tax control of transfer pricing. Therefore, while we don't stop to address this in a different way, erosion of tax base will keep on. We don't see from 012 to date the first OECD document, no new documents throughout these almost 10 years, showing the effective improvements of the 15 sub-actions had in terms of statistics for tax collection to improve, i.e., what was the positive influence of the 15 sub-actions in order to improve the drop on tax collection in a substantial way. And they say, oh, well, time is short, but the story is old. I recall yesterday our dear Paulo Aires Barreto talked about music from a fantastic composer, Antonio Carlos Belchior, like our parents. And I will talk about another musical Belchior, Ode Attire Colorful. You don't see, you don't feel, but I can no longer tell my friend. A new change in soon will take place, and what was young, new, today it's old, and we must always together revamp, get younger. The international community did not renew arm's length, and Brazil has revamped the transfer price tax standard with an older tire, losing color and very criticized. So thank you very much.
I told you that this would be controversial, right? Now, let's proceed. I think that now we can hear Natalia's perspective on this because we know that since 2012, Colombia implemented its rule of transfer pricing, and then there is administration of customs in Colombia published a practical guide that saying that this will be implemented in 3 steps. In 2017, as a result of all the discussions, according to the BAPs, and more specifically in the context of Article 13, Colombia also has been using master file as a requirement. So I think that Natalia, during that, he was ahead of the specific department until 2020. So she participated very actively in this transition period. So let's hear her about her experience, and let's hear how this process of transition took place, because what you faced in the past is something that will help us see what are the difficulties we have ahead. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, everyone.
And I will be speaking in English, it's easier for me. Um, this topic of changing your transfer pricing rules for the OECD standard has bothered me for a long time. The last time I was here, I told you, please don't do that. You know, you already participate in every relevant group at the OECD. You don't need to accommodate your domestic rules to be able to have a voice, which is the case for Colombia. You know, we didn't have a voice. We had to comply in order to just sit at the table. You already were at the table. However, you wanted to try this, and that's okay. It's a lot of work for all of us, so that's good news. But as to your question, Audrey, of, you know, what has all these years of application taught us in Colombia? On that front, I have some bad news for you, because it has taught us that the arm's length principle is broken. And there's two main reasons for that. The first reason has to do with localization. So when you apply the OECD transfer pricing rules, you have to locate functions, risks, and assets. Where is data being stored? Where is data being processed? Where is that remote worker performing the functions as he travels around the world with his laptop? And this is now. If we think again 50 years from now, 30 years from now, the mobility of functions, risks, and assets is going to be greater. It's going to be harder to localize functions, risks, and assets. So we're fighting a trend in technology and the economy, which is delocalizing. You see the blockchain. It's a technology that allows you to delocalize functions, because everything happens in every computer in the network at the same time and nowhere at the same time. So when we keep stubbornly defending the arm's length, what we're doing is fighting against these very trends that are moving our economy forward. And the worst news goes for you, Andre, because it's going to be you who will have to make a determination on whether AI functions are being performed in Brazil, and this is just an algorithm. How are you going to localize something as intangible as that? Good luck, Andre. So this is the first reason, localizing when the world and the economy and technology are delocalizing. And then the second reason that we found that the principle is broken has to do with the very core assumption of transfer pricing, which is that a company, a group, is a lot of separate pieces instead of a big whole. The theory of the firm, there's a Brazilian, Romeu Tavares, who's already written about this and explained why that assumption is just fundamentally failed. And that's why, Andre, you cannot account for the synergies and the extra benefits that an international group has, because integration happened precisely because there was a difference in acting as a group than having a lot of separate independent companies in the supply chain. You see, sometimes an economic group will buy a company not because it's profitable, not because it's going to be the big business, but because I want to acquire the know-how in that company, or because I don't want my competitors to control that link in the supply chain. However, the practice of transfer pricing, you will see it in a few years, is basically based on comparing profitability of companies. It's the TMMS, I think, in 98% of the cases that you're going to be dealing with. So if you're comparing profitability, but there is a very reasonable business decision that you bought a company that is not necessarily profitable, then again, you are applying a principle that just goes directly against reality. And it's not abusive. It's just a business decision that has a business rationale, but that doesn't fit into the arm's length standard. Quite the opposite. You have the transfer pricing guidelines telling you that if the group as a whole is profitable and a little piece of it is having losses in Brazil, then that means that something is very wrong. And guess what? A corporate multinational group is like a body. You know, it's a functioning body, interdependent of all its parts. If you get a shot in your arm for a vaccine, or if you get an injection in your bum to get better from a disease, you will have a bruised part, but as a whole, you will be better. So then you have the poor auditors in the Receita who can only see the arm or the bum having losses. And then maybe someone tells them that in the 10K, that the general well-being interview for the person says that they're profitable and well off. And it turns out there's no abuse there, there's no BEPS, there's no transfer of profits out or in, or losses, which is now more fashionable, out or in. It's just a business decision that I bought a company that was not profitable because it allows me to control a segment of the supply chain, and it's reasonable to do that. So we now have the two reasons, main reasons why we've discovered during all this time, Audrey, that the arm's length principle doesn't really work with economic reality. But in spite of that, and the OECD has already acknowledged since 2015 that there is a brokenness in this whole system, since then we have not been able to come up with something better to regulate international transactions. That's what the OECD always says. So in the meantime, we will have to deal with very specific challenges that have to do with both policy and practice. So I'm just going to mention a very few of them so that you can have some expectations of what may come for you in Brazil. The first aspect that was very troublesome, and we took a long time in Colombia to finally reach a good point, had to do with the subjective scope of the rules. Who are you trying to target with your transfer pricing rules? Is it just the largest companies with the largest profits? Is it the largest companies regardless of their profit? Is it any company with big profits? Is it also domestic companies having operations in free trade zones or special regimes where the effective rate is lower? Is it everybody? Because no one is allowed to engage in BEPS, right? And Andre, you mentioned the tax administration needs a strong database to be able to control transactions. But sometimes, if the database is too big, you end up being ineffective in controlling the biggest risks. So in Colombia, we went back and forth. You know, our first legislation wanted to cover everybody. So we received all this information from all these companies, and it was so hard to find where the real risks were. So we audited little transactions. We lost a lot in courts. Well, the DIAN, the tax administration, lost a lot in courts because they weren't really finding the big fish. So then they moved to a narrower subset, and then it turned out that there were companies that were taking advantage of being excluded from the transfer pricing regime, and they were doing lots of fishy things with the free trade zones. So they said, no, we need to include those as well. And they started extending an originally international regime to domestic transactions as well, because, you know, within our countries we have some zones that are economically depressed or affected by violence and therefore enjoy some specific tax incentives. So in the end, you know, going back and forth, we are now finally at a point where we can find big risks, and we're finally starting to have some wins in courts. But it took us some time, and it may happen with Brazil as well. You know, each country is different. Where are the thresholds? That's something that you will have to calibrate. And there will be some horizontal inequalities in the meantime. You know, those who are excluded but have the same possibilities of planning around it may have different outcomes, and that's an interesting thing to see how it plays out. Another challenge that you'll have, and this was mentioned by Professor Alessandra this morning in my institute, is the value of the OECD guidelines. You mentioned the commentary, Professor Alessandra, but in transfer pricing, the OECD guidelines are like the Bible. You know, everybody uses X or Y paragraph to defend a tax position that they took. For the tax administration, I gave you already an example. If the whole multinational is being profitable, but the Brazilian company is having losses, then that's wrong. They can also use it just to justify why they're auditing you. But then Brazil is not yet a member of the OECD, and the OECD transfer pricing guidelines were not drafted by anyone that was elected popularly in Brazil. What happens with the principle of reserva legal? What happens with, yeah, constitutional democratic principles? So we had the court in Colombia saying that we could not apply the OECD transfer pricing guidelines. Our constitutional court said it was unconstitutional because we had not elected the people at the OECD who were drafting this in WP6, and because we were not a member of the OECD. Now that we're a member, we don't know if that means that the transfer pricing guidelines will become mandatory. But in practice, what the Colombian Tax Administration did is they copied and pasted the OECD guidelines into the regulations, and every time they changed, they had to issue a new decree copying and pasting so that it would make it domestic law. But they pasted those as regulations, not as laws that would go through Congress. You will probably have that discussion as well here in Brazil, because you also share the principle of legality, and there may be some doubts as to what value. Is it just soft law? Is it mandatory for taxpayers? We also had a lot of policy challenges with the penalties. At first, we wanted to be very tough on taxpayers who didn't comply with the regime, because we took a long time to start auditing. So we approved transfer pricing legislation in like 2002, I think, but the first audit started arriving in 2008. 6 years of having rules and not applying them erodes the tax morale. So, you know, we were thinking we have to be very tough, because people are thinking that this is just a game and that we won't be really applying, enforcing the rules. So they went super tough on penalties, and it turns out the Constitutional Court said, be careful, you're being confiscatory, you're violating the non bis in idem principle because you're applying a penalty for transfer pricing plus the adjustment to the median plus the regular inexact penalty for making a mistake in your tax return. So you can't accumulate all those penalties, our Constitutional Court said. So we had to go back and review the penalty regimes. Then we tried something novel with a strike method. So if strike one is a penalty but not so big, strike two, big penalty, strike three, confiscation. It was, I think, 10% of the net value of the company or something. It was huge on strike three. Again, the Constitutional Court said, no, you cannot do this. So in the end, finally, we found a set of rules that make it really tough. And that is the reason why transfer pricing litigation is the most valuable in the portfolio of law firms. For all of you out there working in law firms, the transfer pricing penalties make it very profitable to work in transfer pricing litigation, because it's still very large, because it's about control. You know, if you're not giving the information in your transfer pricing returns, then you're making it very hard for the Geseta to perform audits. So you will have some discussions probably around what's an adequate amount of penalties for this regime. And then finally, there's also some practical challenges that you will face, and those have to do with everything that we've heard about yesterday. You know, we heard in the panel about the sixth method that there were doubts about the dates. There will be doubts about comparables. Can you use 10Ks, or do you need a full contract? In practice, it's really hard to find full contracts for comparability. Then you have the TMMS discussions. Is this company really comparable to this other company? Can I perform all these different adjustments on the financial statements? Because in the end, no company is like any other company. Can we use Chinese companies that are very heavily subsidized as comparables? And we're still having that discussions with the Colombian Tax Authority, because they like using Chinese companies because they're always very profitable because of the subsidies. So can we use that? And what if we have no proof of the subsidies because China doesn't reveal subsidies, because then they get taken to the WTO and all of that? So it's difficult discussions in practice on how are you going to choose your comparables, and if the tax administration has an opinion that your comparables are not good and replaces the whole set for only Chinese companies, is that okay or is it not? And it's difficult practical discussions because, again, the burden of proof is hard when policy is involved, especially in China. There's also the rear view mirror problem, right? Because when you're auditing, you see things now, but when the taxpayer is signing a contract, setting a price, they don't, they have the information that you have today. And then you see it, you still see it in Colombia in the audits, you know. The tax administration sometimes wants the taxpayer to know things that they couldn't know at the time of the transaction. Maybe they could have known next year when they filed their return, but not at the time they signed the contract with the specific price. So applying the rear view, mirror view is sometimes inevitable because it's the information that you have now. How are you going to ignore everything that's happened between the date of the transaction and the date of the audit? But then using that as an obligation for the taxpayer is also challenging because there's no way the taxpayer would have a crystal ball and know all the information that is now available. And then we also had in Colombia some problems with secret comparables, with information that only the GESETA has. So you're going to be receiving, as GESETA, a lot of information from so many different taxpayers that compete against each other. And then you're going to be very tempted to use that information because you know that someone that competes against someone else is having different numbers in their financials. However, for the competitors, it's impossible to know the cost structure of their competitor. If they knew, they would, you know, hire their talent and reduce costs to be more competitive. It's part of the information that you never get when you're out there doing business. So we had to get international experts to come to the tax administration and say, you cannot use it, even if you know that there are significant differences between two competing companies in your market. Then, you know, you will have to calibrate, you know, with the transfer pricing, the comparability, you know, how far should I get in things being comparable? Should they really be equal? Is it okay if they're in the ballpark of similar? Or can I just compare a company that is not even in the same industry, but maybe has a similar transaction? Because we are using TMMS as the most used method. You will be comparing companies against companies, and there's always so many significant differences. For example, in how you leverage your working capital. Some companies use debt, and they will be very heavily indebted in USD, and then you have a devaluation of the Brazilian real, and you already have a significant difference in the financial statements. Can you compare a company that's used debt, that's acquired debt in dollars, with a company that hasn't? Can we adjust and remove that debt altogether? There's so many different practical aspects that you're going to be facing. And that comes down, Audrey, to lots of disputes, which I think we'll be hearing about in the coming years. So parabéns for you, because you will have lots of work, but it will be chaos for the courts. Thank you.
Avisei que ia ser polêmico, está sendo.
We went to polemic and we will keep on being polemic. Well, I love the analogy with the body. It was a visualization regarding what is this difficulty. Fantastic analogy. Now I would like to hear about you, Vivian, as head tech of a multinational company. Your PhD thesis was in transfer pricing. As of January current year, we have the new rules being enforced in a mandatory way, and therefore we might face some practical issues. As a head tech of a multinational company, and taking into account also what you have studied regarding the academic, regarding point transfer pricing, how do you see these challenges of the initial adoption practically way forward? We see the challenges from far away. First, I start thinking I think this is the moment regarding the tax law to unite and think and out of the automatics. It's an honor to be in this file. We have first row. I studied my whole life based on his teaching, Professor Schweri. We have talked together in several round tables. Once I saw Pedro Malan prizing Arminio Fraga, and he used a sentence. There's no adjective that can reach it. I think Professor Schweris and his doctrine, and I was her student. I think all of it, I used Professor Schweris' books. So I will never find normal to have a public like this one. So I would like to start by thank you and always joke, and we address this during some round tables. The industry sees an event like this. How can I contribute? Obviously, it's not on the scientific side. My PhD thesis was price transfer. I was Embraer's head for tax. I had to conciliate the work with PhD. The study burden is too heavy, so it's different from all your working days. You spend all weekend study. So my PhD thesis, and back then I called, the book was published later, transfer pricing as income tax rule adjustment. With the old practice and old legislation, I saw transfer pricing as income tax adjustment price when you go from booking to fiscal account, and then understand the minimum margins, maximum margins arising from mathematical methods as minimum lucrativity or profitability and highest price. So this was arbitrarily made. I would not say arbitrary, but there was legal assumptions that would lead us to adjust, because deep down you would adjust the actual profit adjustment and no changes on the actual price of that transaction, because the invoice was there, the book was there, the ledger was there. So originally the price was originally set forth by the parties. In a way, I never saw scientifically wise when I study. I could not see arm's length reflected in Brazil's legislation. I thought it was assumptions attributed by the legislator for you to do an adjustment of account or booking accounting prices, so you could do the taxable or actual profits of companies. And in fact, when you do a thesis, you must have a position. Back then, I thought the legislation was not constitution, but not by the method, but the presumption of margin enforcement. So that was how it went. And head of tax of multinational companies, I've been doing this for 17 years. I've been in Brazil, American companies, and now I'm in an European company. As much the old legislation was debatable, it was very fit for use according to our liaison standard for the excise. When you dispute in Brazil, might not know how it happens in other countries, but it doesn't happen. They don't have, no companies have 400 suits in the tax area. It is following us, the countries, but it might reach, let's get the most difficult thing we have, but in fact our liaison with tax authorities, and I'm not saying that I like it or it will not evolve, but the fact is tax with liaison with tax authorities, it's dispute, and we have a class of tax attorneys, a law consultants. We are an industry of tax law. We produce science, consulting, backup excellence in attorneys at law. We have a machine of working, which is the inland revenue, which is an excellent machine, by the way. But deep down, our liaison is not one with dialogue. We end by with an infraction being debated at CAR. So we are a society that debated for 20 years the concept of revenues, invoicing with CARF and COFINS. So let's think about the pragmatic side of things. Many said, but Brazil have to explain that the legislation is different. But in this sense, I will use what Andre mentioned. It was always an excellent economy. We always been amongst the biggest economies worldwide with this fantastic legislation that we saw the last days of November '96. But it's difficult. I imagine I did this sometimes, but the fact is our legislation was one very coherent with our liaison with tax authority and our stand as taxpayers when the IRF as the authority. I don't know any other countries with debates, disputes level of Brazil. Obviously, this outcome of 88 constitution that was very detailed, but Hugo Brito would say law is limit. The Constitution of 88 imposed these limits for the tax authority, and we had waged a war for its purpose. We have case law of 20 years, so we use our big masters, we use fantastic scientists and compared law. We produce economic evidence, and therefore, in this path, we obtain huge conquest. Many things from the new legislation really bother me, not only as scientist, if I can see myself as one, but I keep thinking how the tax authority has, and I extend this to OECD, but not only the excise of Brazil. How do you assume the fact that you think you will be able to understand the decision making environment, the economic environment, implying risks of 90 billion, 100 billion companies? Now, last time I shared a table with Professor Schwery, we talked about imagine tax authority wanting to enforce this concept available realistic transaction. Elon Musk. Let's not think he's the. Think SpaceX. Do you think there's any coherence, or do you think it's easy? It's difficult for us that work in these companies. Imagine a tax authority understanding the set of elements that lead you to decide this. And also, there are the sentences like Article 11 sets forth the comparability factors and business strategies. The first thing, with, as Natalia well mentioned, we're talking about what OECD wants and the revenue wants. So things to work out, and they go there, look at business strategy and say, to address your strategy, business strategy is good. Do they think they're going to understand this? Sometimes we work in the company, we don't understand because companies are headed by people with a different point of view. Example, Bobby Igerlu, CEO of Disney. Do you think, in fact, you can understand growth strategy of a Disney and explain to the revenue, inland revenue, and they, by their they think they're going to understand, so they think there are several articles that provide them the right to not consider what they don't understand. Stock exchange don't understand, investors don't understand certain structures. So I am concerned with the same country that debated for 20 years the concept of invoicing revenues and the concept of what's really available. And then Article 14 of EN. I'm talking about EN. We talk about economically important risks. There are committees and committees of risk within companies. I don't believe to be tangible debating important economically wise risks. And did you understand what it is and thought it does not exist? Okay, and then what? Where the economic freedom of a company to decide to assume a risk all or never in a certain country? Because there are those companies that like this big risk, big results. We know some companies work like this. There's not doing business, grow, making money in environment, all map, all workers to know where you're standing. Many the decisions we make, we don't know our stand, we don't know what's going to happen. It does not mean you're going to rethink or map your risk. There are those risks in operations that are not mappable. Therefore, a risk that everybody working in a company, political risk. Let's pray. We don't know. You don't know who's going to win the election. So there are those issues very difficult regarding the legislation. I'm using this expression because, in my opinion, the challenges by adopting it, I've had the opportunity to share this in different occasions. Those the subsidiary companies will only have the headquarters will get the master file, the global policy, and Brazil was a weird chap that they're going to say, now you are in the OECD model. But what happens? Immediately it will be enforced the global study made because transfer price also is coherent. Who was supervised? France, USA, you know, the first thing that the tax authority is to look the lucrativity of your neighbor. Oh, you also sell cups for Germany and France. Why your margin in France is higher than Germany? Yes, sharing the profits. So a portion of profits. The first thing is going to happen, you get a master file and apply immediately for domestic transaction. This because Brazil is not the center of the world for most companies. Therefore, we're going to do a comparable study in Brazil, profitability likewise, functional analysis, so forth. Yes, based on the headquarters transactions because they do the same thing for the other countries or all countries. On the pragmatic point of view, how was the adoption? How is it being doing? It's pragmatic. I get the policy. Look, recalculate, do projections. Does it make sense? Okay, my concern is step two. When I have to explain something, let's say a margin profitability that not necessarily was conceived for Brazil because I have to be coherent so I cannot apportion profits in an unfair way. First step, not to evade the subject at issue here, which is the adoption. The adoption was done. Companies with compliance know this and they are adopting it. How it was done? By getting the master files, looking coherence with global master file and using Brazil. No news here, but now as an example, how to explain the authorities. Article 17 set forth strategy. It will analyze your strategy, thinking about changes that were made. I stress again, going to a company 4 years after the adopted strategies and asking for explanation. The economic context has changed. Probably the board of the company has changed. Outcomes, results are the same. I don't know, in 3 years, perhaps there's a competitor like Natalia mentioned, a Chinese competitor opening a company in the same place I open my, selling cheaper, I have to shift my strategy. So I don't know if with legislation the point we can reach the dynamism, subjectivity, and uncertainty, which is doing business in certain countries, which Brazil is included. So when we talk active functions and risks in an economy like ours, these 3 points, it's not only regarding their dynamic aspect, but they are also change in time frame. Therefore, my concern today is I don't understand the tax authority capable of comply to certain business strategy. I'm not disregarding anyone, but the company per se might not understand sometimes because there are confidentiality in some strategies, and by being confidential as strategies are being decided on the headquarters of the company, which is abroad, and you as just the subsidiary, you just do. Do I have no? I have to explain my government why this strategy makes sense and this risk is strategically feasible. Sometimes not even the CEO of that company in Brazil knows. Therefore, my concern is one, the level of details we will have to ingress in this. If you're MNN, you say it's ready, give to any executive. This is the success manual. You cannot incur in risks. You have to be profitable. That's fantastic. Get the M&N, give to the CEO and say, here, it is the recipe for us to be successful, profitable, and make money. No, no, this does not exist. We don't have logic in certain developments and expansions. As my peers said, sometimes you incorporate a company in a country to keep the share or have your employees there, because if you close, some of your employees will face hard times. So sometimes they don't make sense. But how? How come? Not to be too repetitive and redundant, the implementation is, in my point, is baby step as expected. Everybody's wanting to understand where they stand, and you stop and think, will I stay? And supervision will start. And one of the things I heard during the debates of OECD, and I was against it, that people didn't agree that much at that table. This will cut down uncertainties. No, we open a avenue to have a tax department which is just with disputes, because we will address and debate transactions available. 40, we spent 20 years talking about revenues invoicing concept. It will increase disputes, yes. Will it be more difficult? Yes. And there's a downside on this, which is not no losses and liabilities. Even you doing everything right in Brazil, because you called your CFO and said, well, if you do this account this way, this number, this margin, everything is right. Zero risk. Zero risk. Now, even if you were paying more, you don't talk, I think, Lisandro, here, PRL will not be debated. Some legal certainty you could convey, and if you do this account, obviously, as TED director will say, tax director would say, but if it's zero risk, this is the path to adopt. Currently, it finished. So how to have zero risk? You can pray, because the transaction will be analyzed from both angles, also by the excise of the related party. Those who studied transfer pricing in American European schools know cases of unilateral adjustments that take place in other countries that is imposed to you by the legal system. So transfer pricing now became a risk, not only a huge one, but perennial, long lasting, because the adjustment will renew per year, and as such, you have to offer your best, do the account, look where the risks you don't know if you knew. There are risks you don't know, functions, assets, and you present the number and pray, because you can get an adjustment on the other end. And this adjustment on the other end, because there are classic cases, Glasgow, UK, USA, where Glasgow, UK made the account that was fantastic. It did its own policy, and the adjustment came from USA. It was a huge amount. They did an agreement of $3 billion.
So, in a nutshell, my input here is just to say that from the technical and pragmatic point of view, we have a new legislation that just established more uncertainty than the previous one. This is easy, we know that. And the second thing is that it does increase the tax litigation, because anyone who's been here for the last 15 years understands where we go, where we head into, and then we have to discuss the semantic of things. And if this were not enough, we're still going to discuss as SBS in another chapter. So we're going to discuss everything that we've been discussing plus new things. This is wonderful, isn't it? I think that it should have been done by ourselves, because we just want more fun. And there is no bigger certainty in terms of taxes, because adjustment can come from both countries. And with this, I would like to close. I would like to thank everyone for being here to hear what will happen in this field. I wish I were wrong and to think that things could get better, but I cannot really think that way. But anyway, let's wait for the next case laws so that we can understand where we are really heading. Thank you. Wonderful, Vivian. Excellent. Now, let's try to stop with all this controversy, Flavio. So, let's listen from you. What is your perspective on this? What do you see with regard to these changes? What are the challenges that these changes will bring about, considering academic perspective or you supporting your customers or clients? We heard the perspective from the IRS and also on behalf of the Colombian taxpayer. We also heard the perspective of the multinational companies in Brazil. Now, what can we expect from these new rules? Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. You know, we've been working with my colleagues, coordinators of this Congress, for months to put up this event. This is a wonderful auditorium, right? Of course, this is really filled with people. There is no way we cannot thank you for the time that you have spent with us. I would like to greet all of you on behalf of two people. Marina Padin, she is a law student in seventh year, and my dear professor Michael Lang. So I hope that you enjoy this while as a student and also as a professor who has a lot to bring to us as an input. Thank you. So our proposition here is to speak a little about, well, I have greeted all of you, but I'm going to speak about the challenges about the new OECD standard. And I am one of those who used to like the previous standard. I devoted important years of my life studying this for my postdoctoral course to understand the world should learn from the Brazilian experience, and then we should go hand in hand to improve what we have developed in Brazil. Our turtle that only exists here in Brazil is something that should be shared with everyone so that we could have predetermined margins adopted by OECD. But this is not what happened. I'm not here today to speak about the past. I'm here rather to speak about the future. I would like to share with you my personal view of this. How can we look at this future and the effective change in the paradigm that we have seen? There is a Brazilian author who passed away 10 years ago. If he were a tax law professional, Ariano Suassuna, he would like these margins. He was a nationalist. He always defended the turtles. But he also said that the optimistic is a fool, the pessimist is a bore, and the good thing is really to be realistic and hopeful. So this is what I would like to share with you. This is a perspective that is realistic, but also hopeful that we are going to have some achievements. So we have challenges, and maybe to show that we are on the right way, but we have to work very hard in order to overcome them. These challenges is what we see in practice in the first few years after we have adopted the new OECD standard for transfer pricing. First challenge is what we have all seen. We have to study. Private sector and lawyers, accountants, business people, tax people, we have the greatest challenge, which is to understand that this new legislation. Since 1996, we had this legislation that only existed in Brazil, and now we have a new world that we have to study. This is why we have IBDT, and this is why we can count on us. And we are actually doing an intensive work by promoting refreshment courses and also other disciplines that study or transfer pricing. And there are other institutions that do so, and now they will also have to devote some time to study this new discipline. There are several institutions around the world, like in Vienna, the Netherlands, Spain. No, here, this is the place for you to see these professors say, "Can I study with you?" So this new legislation that we have here in Brazil is reflected everywhere in the world, and we do have to dedicate time to understand it. Now, of course, we have all the tax obligations. We have to speak about master file, local file, and other acronyms. But of course, we have a more tax obligation. This is a reality. And also, we need to take advantage of what was done in other places in the world. So, Vivian said in a different webinar that when we think about a master file, this may be ready. And in the normative instruction that speaks about uh, transfer pricing, we could also use these documents in English. If auditor wishes, they can request a simple translation of that into Portuguese. And if they insist on the need to have a sworn or certified translation, so the document can be used provided it is also submitted with this certified translation. So now you understand the work that I've been done in the company and what I work for. Because apart from these tax obligations, there was no need to get to know my business because I just lived in my world. But now I have to talk to my colleagues. So lunchtime now is more fun because now I get to know all the business, and this has to be reflected in the local file and also in the master file. A client told me that when you access the master file on the controlling company, you look at that said, I cannot see myself there. It seems that you did not see me as what I did in my country. So now we have to refine that. That relationship has to get better. And there is a need of a more specialization of tax authorities. So, as well as the private sector that had lived with the old legislation according to predetermined margins, which was safer and simpler, now they will have to also go through new courses in order to face the new world. And of course, they can also count on IBDT for this. This is really something amazing because the tax authorities has really conducted all this qualification course not only with IBDT but also OECD. You know, we heard that they also have helped the IRS in Brazil in order to conduct this course not only here in Brazil but also abroad to provide training for tax authorities. Lack of study materials in Portuguese. So the gossip I heard back in 1996 is that Brazil adopted predetermined margins as if they were, you know, assumed profits, which is much simpler apart from the actual earnings. So we adopted that principle for some reasons, whether because of the size of the market, because there were multinational companies here, but also because of the difficulty to train tax authorities and also even the companies to have access to those materials that were not in Portuguese. Of course, today we have a much bigger number of people that can read in a foreign language. So when we talk to colleagues from tax authorities, you can see that, you know, I can see that here, people from IRS are my friends, and I know that you all have language skills. You can read in English and other languages. However, it is important to have a Portuguese taxes with that content. And this is also where you can count on IBDT. Now, at the master degree course, we had the Center of Research of Master Degree Thesis. And this is where we conduct research related to specific subjects. We have a group of researchers about agribusiness taxes, like Silvetti, and group of researchers that deals about Pillar 2 legislation with Leonardo Aguirre and Vito Colizelli. We also have study groups that address consumption reform. They have submitted an article. And right now, as we speak, there is a study group that is being now studying the translation of the OECD guidelines about transfer pricing. And the idea is to publish that in Portuguese this year. We are in the final stage of its publication. So from cover to cover, we are going to publish that in the best version possible in Portuguese. We're going to share this with IRS and the OECD. And it's important that it's disseminated so that all this material can be read in a more disseminated way. A couple of years ago, when we still were hopeful that maybe we would have a mixed world, my dear Andrea, and maybe that we will also have predetermined margins like safe harbor, then OECD and the Brazilian IRS have published an excellent paper, even though it is a little bit old, but it is worthwhile reading it. All the taxes were also published by these two institutions. But during that transition period, what was written, are you going to abandon the predetermined margins? Are you going to have this transition period? Are you going to skip that as a safe harbor? They also handle other topics, so it's worthwhile reading it. Now, one of the advantages of keeping the old method is the idea that we wouldn't have enough information about market comparables. When we speak about the transfer pricing, well, I agree with Marina, but it's important also to get to know what is the arm's length principle. It says that when I see my dear Jose Maria, what do I do? I will hug you. I do not know you, but it's a great pleasure to meet you. So, how are you? So, because I do not know him, so I will just greet him with a shake hand. So, I treat Jose Maria as a person that I did not know, as arm's length. So, how can I know what criterion applies to a non related party and to a related party? So, I need information for that. And that information is today obtained in different ways, but in particular about a database or from database. And this is a business in countries like in Europe and the US. They have been developed for many years. And like in the US, we have a very big number of information because there is a higher number of people listed in the stock exchange market. So this is why they have this database. So there was a fear that do we have a capacity in Brazil to develop all this database? Can we apply this legislation of the OECD without that? I have to tell you that based on our experience with foreign databases that were brought to Brazil have been very good. We have seen a growing quantity of information and data about companies, especially companies listed in the stock exchange market. And there is also a great will of these companies or database companies to improve the quality of this data. We have some colleagues here that also work in these companies of database. So this shows this intention to understand Brazil and work with this. We have also seen some deficit in updating information from one year to the other with regard to information in this database, but quickly they have addressed them. So it seems to me that here we can overcome that challenge. And we do have a culture in this country of establishing relationship that is of a mistrust between tax authorities and taxpayers. On YouTube, you can just put there Brazilian RAS. You can see some videos from the 1980s when the lion has been adopted as the figure to represent the IRS. And then a child sees a lion and says, oh, the IRS is there on the street. And then the mother says, oh, this is just the IRS. So if you just submit your income statement return correctly, the lion will not attack you. So we have a fear to talk to IRS because of this, saying that this is my business and I think that I should do this and that. What do you think? Oh, I fear to. People usually do not present an inquiry to the IRS. When I was in the Netherlands for my postdoctoral thesis, I was from CARF and I went to Brasilia every month to participate in the meetings, but I spent 3 weeks in a month in Netherlands. So, according to Brazilian legislation, I will become a resident in the Netherlands because I remain there more than 180 days there. Then I consulted the Netherlands IRS. I said, well, this is my card of IRS. I have income here. I had the fellowship of postdoctoral course. I brought my dog. I have been living here. I am a resident for tax purposes. And then the tax authorities told me, I don't think so, because here we work with facts and circumstances. And it looks to me that you're going to return to your country. If your situation changes, then we talk. Then I received a booklet from the mail saying income tax return as a resident. Then I sent an email to that tax authority and I said, well, something changed. He said, no, this was a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk to my colleague and this will be solved. You do not have to submit your income tax return. There were some other experiences there that I realized that the relationship is very good between IRS and taxpayer. But it's not because I'm in front of here some tax authority friends here that I say this, but I experienced that personally. This was a paradigm shift in terms of relationship between the tax authorities and taxpayers. And this is very clear when you see the project, when you trust, in contributions and intention of the tax authority saying, well, let's negotiate at that I know that you have been having difficulty in paying. Let's talk according to transparency principles and ethically. We have already started this process. In Brazil, we have some sports like soccer. They say that soccer is a national sport, but there is a text from a Dutch professor saying that no taxation without litigation. And then he speaks about it in India, Italy. And then he said, in Brazil, soccer may be their favorite sport, but litigating against the tax authorities is their preferable sport. So we have more than 100,000 lawsuits waiting to be decided at the CARF. And we spent a long time with all these lawsuits. So the judiciary branch and the CARF in the following years will have to experience more lawsuits being filed because of the price transfer or transfer pricing issues. The number is not really that high. Being realistic, this number will just increase. Being hopeful, CARF counselors, judges will also have to study this matter and also be trained on this. And counselor from the first session of CARF will also have to be admitted, provided they show to understand and be skillful in dealing with transfer pricing. This is because of the number of cases that will increase related to this. And also because of this, we should have alternative dispute resolutions cases that are not so concrete here. We also have the transaction, which is an alternative to a dispute resolution. Right now, we also have approved that the relationship between taxpayer and tax authority has been better. And now we have a public consultation that has been opened by tax authority to discuss the normative instruction, which is secondary rule, just for you to understand. So the secondary rule, infra-legal one, to regulate IPA or APA. So before the litigation is filed, let's try to come into agreement so that we can establish the settlement requirements. What are the comparables to be admitted? What is the interval to be adopted for adjustment purposes for transfer pricing? Right now, we have this public consultation open, so this means that we're going to have the APA, which will really be able to reduce the number of litigations. Claudia Pimentel, you are here. I do not speak anything bad about you. So she was our student at master degree course in tax law, and she published an excellent work about APA. And in that paper, we have not only APA, which is unilateral, but also there is a deep study on MAP, which is bilateral, so involving two countries, because we can have two countries interested in the same situation. In order to avoid double taxation, it's important that these countries talk, or MAP, which is a talk among more than one country or two countries.
So we still don't have arbitrage in Brazil, but we are addressing this subject. In Portugal, there's a website cases.com, you have transfer price decisions worldwide, and many from Portugal of court, arbitration court addressing the subject, an expert that's not for an administrative court or judicial court, but the arbitrage for analyzing transfer pricing issue. Do we have it in Brazil? Might we? We might. But also we have international arbitrage here. I will be a bit pessimist in this case. Perhaps this will take some decades. International arbitrage, you need an agreement in Article with 25. No Brazilian agreement has this clause. We have to renegotiate or include this clause in our agreements to have international arbitration. And some countries adopt basic arbitration, which is an arbitrage method specifically for transfer prices used a lot for this purpose. Do you think we will have this in Brazil? Probably it will take more. So I wrap up my presentation uh, within the given time, and I will use the last 1 minute to invite you. Ha- ha- Give me your hand in this stand outlook, but it's realistic and hopeful that we will make this work out. So thank you very much. In fact, Professor Luz Fabio, you took some time and you will have no time to talk because you went beyond the time we gave you. So we have a wrap up now going back to Professor André. Professor André, being aware of your life, that's very practical, academically wise, also professor of graduation, post-graduation of the Federal University of Pernambuco. In one of your classes, you mentioned the arm's length principle, and we are talking about Brazil, with perhaps within the international context. It is talk not much about the theoretic and scientific grounds of this principle. Could you do this wrap up, please? I will give you 5 minutes. Well, I will try to summarize. A brief comment. The attendees saw there was a certain skepticism of those in this table regarding this new momentum. I always say that attendees we talk to, they might be more technical, depending being a professional course for specialization or more academic for PhD, master's degree. But regarding of those hearing us, we must be aware that we have to study a lot this subject. Drill down in it, the private initiatives, companies, office consulting companies, and the tax administration included. So they will have a deep work to face. Now, as for the theory, going back for the academy, my dear master Souto Borges, he always said, every time we have the problem with the legal institute, we have to go deep on the theory grounding base. We have to go to the principles of the institute and principles aspect. And when I dedicated to analyze arm's length, I see that the principle of equality within the philosophic classic Aristotelic classes, equal, treaty equal the equal, isonomy for the different and different in the proportion of the differences between the parties. So arm's length basically is comparison principle, but it goes against the Aristotelic logic of the isonomy principle because it compares different things, two different things. By doing so, it goes against a key principle which is task neutrality, economic and legal theory. What is being neutral tax-wise? Taxes must have the minimal influence on the decision process of taxpayers. But when I have this comparison, I receive an adjustment, I stop things and say, wow, I must have a decision process that's different. If I go this way, I'm in this method. I will be adjust that does not take to account my efficiency premium and comparing me with the less efficient, so interferes with the logic behind the tax authority, and it will levy taxing on me of possible fictitious income, and then it affects the paying capacity because I'm paying more taxes than what I owe. So 5 minutes in a nutshell, I can see that arm's length goes against the equality principle, taxpayer contribution capability, and with this we have legal uncertainty. So notice, it is difficult for us to accept and agree that truly there is a theory grounding, either economic or legal, that can sustain in a plausible way arm's length, accepting as a standard principle. And when we show there's this frailness regarding the theory, on the practical side, we know the many fragilities that we face on the practical side. I insist, if profit shifting the main instrument is transfer pricing, in fact, transfer pricing is international scale tax evasion. So I'm very happy to know that Professor Sopsioto is developing a deep study to present to the community a sort of draft of international form, because we have a community of 240 countries, 35, 40 developed, 30 developing, and a mess of miserable places. The output, income generation in transnational basis must be apportioned with all. Arm's length is causing problems to develop that calls BEPS project that is not yet solved this has not yet solved this problem. But what happens at the table, the asymmetries of power are huge, and we forget we have an underdeveloped country that's miserable and does not receive any share of taxes to be taxes, and this income in the profit shift to go to tax havens, and they are within the tax planning abusive mechanism that pays taxes nowhere. Thank you. Now for the wrap up, we will you shared substantially your practical experience looking ahead. Now, in 3 minutes, because time is reduced, in 3 minutes, how would you compare the previous scenario with the current one? Or we'll see from now onwards. And if you want to share with us an outlook that's not practical side, so I made clear my point of view, but nothing, there's nothing that could not worse. A central bank chairman said that task matters. Gustavo Frank said that the excise will change 6 for half of 12. So I liked the 490 rule. It need adjustment. Fixed margins had to be addressed. It had to be sectored in a way, but it presented more legal safety, less disputes. I say this as tax head. I took part of this area, and the new legislation you will face again, so bringing some stability, and with time we will have it, but deep down we are talking about transfer pricing act change in the year of tax reform in Brazil. So lots of things that we as a package, we have a challenge ahead of us, and I see young people in this room, and I tell you the following: I'm lucky to watch the birth of the taxation system for indirect, direct, JCP, subvention prices, indirect reform. It's a lot of things now. Go home and study, talk with André, and again we will generate the mess, better, worse, But the fact is, Brazil, I stress, we always been one of the biggest economies worldwide. It will not change. And we have worked for the 15 years, and it's a huge amount of work for all of us. Fantastic, Vivi. And now pass the floor to wrap up of Natalia. Natalia, in your first talk, you mentioned don't do it, but we have done it. And now, considering that we have done, and perhaps the next step in this debate would be the issue related to tax rulings. What's your experience regarding the tax rulings of Colombia?
Yes. So I think I would like to issue 4 sets of recommendations for all of you. The first are recommendations just for the Receita. First is you need to talk to each other. You know, we've created in the PTLAC a sort of JITSIC internally for the region where you can talk to auditors, transfer pricing auditors in Colombia, in Peru, Chile, Argentina. They have experience and, you know, multinationals use the same strategies all around. So it's very likely that you will find structures that have been already audited in other jurisdictions if you join these groups and talk to each other in other tax administrations. Second recommendation for the Receita, get close to the taxpayer. You know, the more you know the taxpayer's business, if you follow the business news, then you'll be able to really know if what they're doing is reasonable or not. For the taxpayers, plan and document. So every time you're going to move functions, risks, or assets around, every time you engage in a new transaction, every time you do a pricing exercise, make sure that you get someone here to accompany you in that process and document everything so that you're not in Vivian's position where you cannot explain the strategy or the reasons why you did what you did. Leave everything in writing and always find business reasons behind everything you do. Then for the both, focus on dispute resolution, like Luis Flavio said, and with dispute prevention, because you're going to have lots of discussions because of the subjectivity that Andre already mentioned in these rules. So work on your APAs. Make sure that you can sit together and have a very reasonable conversation with the taxpayer. Is this reasonable? Is this not? And make sure you have enough training to make that call. And then same for maps, same for arbitration. Do your best to have a good dispute prevention and resolution system. Engage in ICAP. ICAP has a lot to teach. You can learn from other tax administrations on how they audit taxpayers. And then finally, I have a recommendation for academia, IBDT and USP. First, let's work on a better solution than the arm's length. Have your students think about it, you think about it. We may come up with something better because we already know that this is broken, but we can make it better. And then second recommendation, and this is very important here in Brazil, train your judges because this will go to litigation. And judges are the ones that receive the least training. You know, the Receita, you're always in contact with the OECD, you get trainings from everybody, you get exchanges with other tax administrations, but the judges, they don't get any of this. So offer trainings, free trainings for your judges, USP and IBDT, because they will be the ones deciding in the long run for many of these disputes. And that's where the rulings come and become very important. You know, the proportionality of benefit of a tax ruling is determined by the knowledge of those who are issuing it. So if you have tax rulings issued by judges, then make sure that they're adequately trained. If the tax administration is using tax rulings to prevent disputes, then that's also commendable. Get training and know your taxpayers before you do so, though. Thank you.
No final, todo mundo vai ter que estudar.
Finally, everybody will have to study, keep on study. This is the main message behind this, both the revenues, inland revenues, taxpayers, judging body, and operators here. And we have time additional time, I would like your final remarks. Is there anything currently that we did not mention or you would like to stress that would be important for our attendees regarding the transfer pricing and the initial drops? And well, my final words will be to address your initial remarks. I'm absolutely sure that seeing students like you that we are training, we will be able to do a good work on transfer pricing. You have stressed outstanding out in the master's course. Congratulations. And come with us. This is our example. Join us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Generosity, thriving. Now I pass to Mara for the final remarks and to wrap up this panel. Man, thank you. Audrey, and really, after having heard all these explanations, I conclude that we have to do the right questions to have the right solution. And truly, we leave these premises with an important mission. So I believe that these are the reasons we have for an auditorium that's so complete and packed up, because challenges. Likewise, since the first Congress, we have 72 individuals enrolled, and today we have 500. So challenges just increase. So I stress my thank you on behalf of IBDT, your presence, the presence of the participants, the invitation that was made by IBDT on the person of Professor Schweri, and to thank all of you for hearing us and participated again, once again in this roundtable. Thank you very much.